Now we're actually live, y'all. We apologize for the technical difficulties. We are officially here chatting with y'all. I see all these exciting places that you're tuning in from. Go folks who are from Boston and from North Carolina and all these great cities in this country and around the world as well. Thank you for being here. We had some technical difficulties. Thought we were live. We weren't, but we're here again. Happy to chat with y'all. To just speed things along, my name is Mauricio Gonzalez. I'm an assistant director of undergraduate admission at Northwestern, an alum, graduated 2 years ago with a degree in psychology and a certificate in integrated marketing communications. And I'm very honored and privileged to be speaking with some wonderful guests who work directly with the Garage, in the Garage. We have a Northwestern alum here with us today, and we're going to be specifically talking about the launch that will soon to become in January of the Garage's podcast, How I Got Here. And we'll be talking more about entrepreneurship and the support for those ventures on campus. But before we do introduce our guests, I'm going to play this quick video as I shared a little bit earlier while you weren't here and we thought you were here. It's going to be of a little bit of an inception moment because we'll be sharing a video that's on YouTube showing you a little bit more of the space that the Garage has to offer, and you'll get to see some familiar faces that are with us here today. So stay tuned for that. Okay.
There is something beyond brilliance that defines the bold innovators. It's something that can't be taught. It comes from pounding the pavement, taking risks, and learning to pick yourself up when you fall. Our founders, designers, and hackers have the grit, courage, and commitment needed to do, to create, and to thrive. Welcome to the place where classmates become colleagues. Doing is the only curriculum where you can test yourself beyond your limits and build your ideas into realities. It's not a classroom. It's the Garage.
Awesome. Just to say, I always feel inspired by the incredible things that you do, and I know we're going to inspire folks here today. So without further ado, I'm going to toss it back to our team, have Melissa introduce herself, then have Mike introduce himself, and then our guest of honor, Northwestern alum, as well, Connor, introduce himself. So go ahead, Melissa.
Hi, everybody. My name is Melissa Kaufman. I'm the founding executive director of the Garage. Back when I was where you guys are today, I was applying to college. So I ended up studying at Dartmouth. I studied computer science. And then one of my first jobs out of school was at Google in the APMM program, which Connor was also one of his first jobs. So he's going to tell you guys a little bit more about that. The Garage is about 5 years old. You can see I'm here today. Quick little tour. Nobody here, just me. So I don't have my mask on. And excited to hopefully welcome some of you guys someday to our space. I'll kick it over to Mike.
Thanks, Melissa. Hey, everyone. I'm Mike Rabb. I'm the associate director at the Garage. So work with Melissa in overseeing many of the programs we've built to increase accessibility for student entrepreneurs since the Garage's inception. As Mauricio hinted at, I'm also a Northwestern alum. So I graduated back in 2012, and I was a film major, radio, television, film, what's known as RTVF. And also psychology and business institutions program minors. And after graduating from Northwestern, I spent about 5 years working in strategy roles in the entertainment and TV industry in Los Angeles, and then spent a couple of years up in San Francisco working for a venture capital firm founded by a couple of other Northwestern alums, and then started building out a satellite of the Garage in San Francisco, specifically for Northwestern and Kellogg alum operators, investors, and founders, basically to connect back to students at the university. So we have a really powerful ecosystem here and community, and I'm excited to share more about it with you today. I'll kick it over to Connor.
Hi, everybody. I'm Connor Regan. I studied learning and organizational change at Northwestern, and also got the certificate in entrepreneurship and a couple other things along the way. I graduated in 2016. Since then, as Melissa alluded to, I joined the Associate Product Marketing Manager program at Google upon graduation, have loved Google and have been here ever since, but my path has definitely gone a few different directions, from everything from privacy and security, focused specifically on helping keep kids safe online, to a completely different journey I took, going across the pond, living in the Netherlands for a little bit, working on retail marketing for Nest products, and then most recently jumping back across the pond, back to San Francisco to join the policy team at YouTube, where I essentially focus on helping set the rules of the road for how YouTube as a platform should work. And part of what I really like about that is asking kind of these intellectual questions around, how do we bound free speech and those sorts of things. So that's what I do now. My journey at Northwestern also took many different directions, and the garage played a big role in that. So I'm excited to chat about it with all of you today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone, for being here again. And to my viewers here today, if you have any questions at all for any of these folks about anything that they've shared, anything you're curious about, or anything that pops up in the discussion, please do drop it in the YouTube chat. We'll be taking the latter half of this portion to ask your questions. But I do have some questions for our wonderful group here today. Connor, at no surprise, I'm likely going to pick on you first. So I had the opportunity, as I shared a little bit earlier, to listen to this wonderful podcast that was put together by Mike and Melissa, as well as their colleague Elizabeth over at the Garage. And you were one of their first guests, and I really loved the episode. And you've already introduced this already, but you talked a lot about taking multiple paths. As a spoiler alert for my viewers here today, Connor actually pursued 11 different internships while he was an undergrad at Northwestern. But I want to take a step back. Many of these kids are right now, or I guess they're not kids, excuse me, the students are in high school or looking to transfer to Northwestern and in the process of figuring out where they can call their undergraduate home for the next amount of time in their life. Can you think back to when you were looking at colleges and universities, or maybe in your early days at Northwestern, as to how you sort of figured out where you wanted to pursue entrepreneurship in your undergraduate career? I know that the Garage has played a huge part, but I want to start sort of at the beginning and hear more about that here today.
Sure. Yes, I think the first thing I would say is that the path definitely became increasingly clear over time. It was not at all clear at the start. And so, if you're listening and you're a junior or senior in high school and you're like, there's not even an unclear path, there's just no path at all, that is both like super normal and completely okay. And I think actually a lot of folks are, multiple years into college before the path starts to kind of, become apparent. So yeah, for me, I kind of alluded to this on the podcast, so I do encourage you to watch when that releases. But I think my kind of first intentions or first thoughts when I was a freshman at Northwestern were really guided by what other people said was the right path. And I think there was a lot of kind of messaging around a subset of career paths, which are super valid, but the guidance, I think, was maybe a bit narrow and kind of really focusing my attention. At one point I was told, if you want to do business, whatever do business is, a lot of things in the world of business, but if you want to do business, you have to study economics. You went to a school like Northwestern, but we don't have a business major, so you have to study economics. That was one of the first kind of myths that I, through my own kind of charting of my journey, I debunked. Like, that's not true. You don't have to study economics. If you want to study economics and you love it, which it is super interesting, then that's great. But this kind of was one of many things where, the information I was receiving, I kind of went through a process of almost debunking a little bit. And that's both in terms of what I studied and ultimately job-wise where I landed. But to go back to your question, kind of how did that path evolve?
Yeah.
I think came down to me trying a lot of things. And that's something I think the advice I'll give, throughout today will probably be like a mix of broad advice that whether you end up joining us at Northwestern, which I hope you do, or you go somewhere else that is applicable. And then I'll also try and share like how Northwestern specifically is an amazing place to realize these intentions. But for me, I was able to find so many diverse experiences, and all of those like were just little kind of incremental guideposts to help me find my path. And I think Northwestern did a great job of just serving up a million opportunities that I could kind of use.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that that was something that I really love that you shared in your podcast and in your story. You know, you are, for those who don't know, you studied in our School of Education and Social Policy, in our Learning Organizational Change program, which I know that I get a question a lot from so many students in high school of, as you just mentioned already, you know, Northwestern doesn't have an undergraduate business program. This is something that I'm curious about, want to dabble in. How can I pursue that? And similar to yourself, I think when I also was engaged in that idea and curiosity in undergrad, I also thought, you know, I think I can only study economics to be able to pursue an undergraduate business career. However, that was not the case. And as I got to, you know, unlike yourself, and I'll definitely be picking on you a little bit more throughout this entire episode for Life Northwestern here today, not to make it about myself, but I did value the diversity of thought that was in the classroom in my Northwestern experiences. I mentioned I was a psychology major, but I was able to take classes in our business institutions program minor. And even to this day, I mean, like yourself and, you know, the current students that are working in the garage, y'all inspired me to dabble in entrepreneurship and in your stories. And it makes me really proud to be a Northwestern alumnus to hear about the fact that you know, biased because I work for the university and I'm an admission officer that interacts with students who will tell positive stories about my Northwestern experience, but getting to hear about the fact that you even felt supported through the garage and other spaces to be successful in undergrad and be as successful as you have been after undergrad is such a refreshing and remarkable thing to hear. So tell me, you talked again already about these systems in place that supported you throughout Northwestern to stray away from that original rigid mentality that can sometimes happen at universities. Can you talk a little bit more about, and I guess this is where Mike and or Melissa can also jump in if you feel, how the garage and other spaces, those specific experiences that open up the door for you in opening up your mindset more so to those diverse perspectives, whether it's a program or anything along those lines?
Yeah, sure. So I think a place like Northwestern with so many different opportunities, you start to realize that what you can glean from different places all can kind of build toward one like bigger picture. So for example, even with my 11 internships and all of this like very hands-on experience that I made kind of my number one goal, that's not to in any way discount like all of the value I got from much more academic or theoretical kinds of learning that happened in the classroom. And another kind of good example is, you know, how does the garage or other kind of student entrepreneurship type programming or support? The Farley Center for Entrepreneurship has a certificate in entrepreneurship. Like each of these provides kind of a different approach to either gaining new knowledge or kind of putting your knowledge to the test. So like the garage for me was a really great way for me to go and actually build something. There wasn't a whole lot of like people telling me new things or like, you should do this and then this and then this. It was way more like try and like see where things go. One of the things I worked on in the garage was a drone company, and I knew nothing about drones. And luckily I was not an engineer on that project by any stretch of the imagination, but I learned about drones by working on a drone startup. And I was like the marketing and business type person in the room, but that was a good example of like, I probably would not have taken a class where they were talking about robotics. That was just too far outside of my path. But by having kind of multiple things, you know, as I like think about the map or whatever that was my time through Northwestern, that in a very practical way taught me something, you know, super interesting that I then, you know, went and was able to monetize, if you will, and make, you know, like more impactful on my resume. And so all of that to say, I think the path thing is I think sometimes can almost seem daunting of like, oh, there's so many things you can do. And it's like a little bit overwhelming. But I think for me, like it was way more empowering to know that I could go and spend a quarter in the garage doing something a bit less traditional. You know, I'm not getting a grade for it, but I can get so much more because I was in the driver's seat and I was able to figure out like, I should go and put my, you know, focus on this for a little bit. So anyways, that's what I would throw out there about those hands-on experiences at first.
Yeah, I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Is there anything that you want to add, Melissa and or Mike?
Yeah, I have two things that I want to say to the 67 of you that are listening from all over the world right now, and your next step is going to be college. I have two things that I just really want to get out there. The first, as you guys are looking towards college and how to spend that time, is that 101 viewers around the world. Two things. If you guys take nothing from today's conversation, I want you guys to remember two things. So the first is that college is a wonderful time to try out a lot of different things that you're interested in, to try to figure out what you enjoy doing and what you're good at. So Connor did that by trying 11 different internships. Another great way to do that is just to put yourself into communities or spaces or experiences that you might not have access to otherwise. And college is a great time to do that because you're on these like vibrant campuses with lots of smart people and people from different backgrounds. So really immerse yourself in that. We took a group of students to San Francisco. We met Brian Chesky, who's the founder of Airbnb, who just had a really big week last week. And what he told the students is like, look, like if you just kind of go through college, maybe like 3 of the options out of school will naturally emerge. But like imagine that there's 100 and you should spend college trying to figure out like what are those other 97. So that's my first piece of advice is like try to unlock those doors of like who you are, what you're good at, and what your talents are. So you can think about that and where you're going to take your life after school. My second piece of advice is when I worked at Google, I was in the 200 club. So I did over 200 interviews of recent college graduates that were trying to get into programs. And one of the things that really stood out was the difference between students that just did school and academics and their clubs and whatnot, and those that had really stood out from the pack by leaning into something that was really unique. So a project, for example, an entrepreneurial project maybe that they were working on. And regardless of whether that project was successful or not, it gave them a real world example that they were learning through, that they could really talk about the experiences of the skills that they learned and teamwork and and problems that they might have faced. And it always made for a more interesting interview. And it really gave each candidate a lot of personality. So I encourage you to find a project like that. It could be a not-for-profit, it could be an art project, it could be a startup, it could be your own idea, it could be like Connor's example where he was joining and helping out a drone company as a marketing person. But I really, really encourage all of you to try to do those two things while you're in college at Northwestern. We're here to support you if you come to the garage. If you end up on another college campus, I'd still encourage you to think about those two things I just said. That's all I wanted to add. I feel like that's what I needed, our audience, I needed you all to know.
I love it. Go for it, Mike.
Yeah, just to jump in to expound on both Melissa and Connor's points, which I think are super important. To expound on Melissa's point about having a differentiating project or something that you're passionate about that really shows you developing something from start to finish, even if it isn't successful. There was one of our episodes in this season of the podcast is Ali Qureshi, and he's an equities trader at Goldman Sachs now, right? So like pretty traditional career track out of school. But it's a super competitive path. And the reason that he got that job is because he had a startup at the garage as a student called Party in a Box. And Party in a Box did not succeed. It wasn't revolutionary, but it did give him all of these experiences and knowledge that when he was interviewing for roles and they saw on his resume that he was the founder of a company called Party in a Box, he would just explode with passion, talk about what he learned. And it was such a differentiator to everyone else, right, that he's competing with for this role, that had probably pretty similar internships that, maybe they weren't as passionate about. So that's the one thing I want to say on Melissa's, but totally agree with her. And then on Connor, you kind of mentioned, you're working with this robotics startup at the garage, even though you have no technical ability. And I think that's another really magical thing about our community is that we serve students in all different schools, whether it's the Bynum School of Music or Medill School of Journalism, McCormick, obviously engineering, but even Kellogg, which is our MBA program. So you have all these students with very different skill sets that are in the same space working on projects together. And that leads to a lot of learning and growth for each other that, again, is not in the classroom. Because I think if you're, like Melissa said, only focused on learning stuff in the classroom, then you're going to be stuck around people who are in the same program or majors that aren't challenging you or teaching you different ways to think. So I just thought that was really important to call out for Connor's experience as well.
Oh yeah, thanks for sharing that, Mike. And I think that's something I definitely wanted to touch upon. The fact that I think that there's a lot of questions that are coming in through our chat already. But I think that from what I'm gathering in the thread, there's questions already about so does it specifically Is it only for engineering? And the answer is no, based on what both of you shared and what I know and Connor's experiences. Is it for only for this, only for that? Or do I have to take this class? Like the answer is no for my viewers out there. I think that's the nice thing about the garage space is that as they already have mentioned, there are so many paths for y'all to get involved with their different programs. And there's no specific class you have to take to be affiliated with the garage or no specific type of student you have to be. So that's something that's really great about the entrepreneurship scene at Northwestern. Connor, there was something that has been brought up by Melissa and Mike as well. This idea of passion. I loved the way that you spoke about your experiences of like finding your passion and that being so clear in the interviews that you were having post-graduation, specifically with your experiences working with Best Buddies on campus and finding your passion that specific way. Can you talk a little bit more about how you found your passions while at Northwestern? Any advice for students who are looking for a place that allows them to explore their passions and find those, and how you found those at Northwestern? I don't know if that makes sense, but I was just moved by what you said in that podcast episode.
No, completely. I think going to that point around Best Buddies, I think I'm glad you brought that up because my passion, stepping back, Best Buddies is a sister organization of Special Olympics. Basically, we try to create opportunities for friendship, employment, and self-advocacy for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this is a good example of like a project, program, nonprofit that I really kind of sunk my teeth into that has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, nothing to do with business, nothing to do with like my professional career, but I have really enjoyed it. And I have done it since I actually started when I was a freshman in high school and carried it all the way through college and still am involved now. So we're talking like 15 plus years or something like that at this point, like a long time of really kind of caring about Best Buddies. And so I think this is a good example of having something that you can really own. And that thing that you really own, that it is evident to others that you care about it in a genuine and deep way, doesn't have to be something that was like meticulously strategized and placed on a roadmap to the job you want. You know, like I wasn't gaining like financial skills or like marketing skills or anything like that, but I was developing so many soft skills, so many, even just like stepping back from like skills, I was learning how to love something and like put a lot of effort into something. And that can come in so many different forms. Like if you're a music student and you're really investing in music, like that kind of passion, I think is the key. What you're exerting the passion on is actually much less important. And I think sometimes people flip that. So that's the first thing I'd say there. I think that, you know, how does school kind of play into this? For me, like I had already been involved in Best Buddies for four years coming into college. And so I kind of already knew this was something of interest to me, but plenty of students get to college and it's kind of like the world is your oyster. You know, you could do a million different things. And so I think my advice there would be at first, try to take it all in and don't dive too deep into any one thing too quickly. You know, don't rule out the things that maybe don't immediately click into, you know, some sort of equation in your head. But over time, that kind of dynamic does need to change a little bit. And I think for me, like where I invested my like time and energy was in getting real world working experience. I couldn't have done the 11 internships if I was also trying to go that deep on a lot of other things. So like I made a lot of sacrifices where I was just like, this element of the college experience, I'm either sacrificing or I'm really dialing down so that I can invest over here. And if I hadn't been willing to kind of make those trade-offs, I don't think I would have been able to see the success in the area that I did decide to dive into. And again, like I think to the point that both Melissa and Mike kind of touched on, this could be an entrepreneurial project. This could be, you know, I get to freshman year of college and I'm like, I'm going to start a startup and I'm going to try my best to make it successful. But even if it doesn't work, I'm going to put so much of myself into it that it's evident where I directed my passion and all of the kind of benefits that I reaped from that. So that would be my advice there. Summing that up, I think what you do matters way less than how you do it, I guess, is a simple way of stating it.
No, yeah, I absolutely love that. And I couldn't agree more, especially given, but many of us are Northwestern alumni and or have similar experiences. All of y'all have very incredible experiences with entrepreneurship and have lived incredible lives and incredible careers. And I think that's something that is standing out from what all of you are sharing and that has been shared in the podcast is the fact that, you don't have to necessarily always vie for this type of internship with this type of company that is also ever sought or anything along those lines to be able to gain the skills, experiences, just doing what you love and pursuing that passion is, at least to me, and I'm going to throw this question back at all of you, what it seems to be the definition in a way of entrepreneurship, of course, being innovative, starting something from the ground up. To me, at least, it could be completely different for y'all. And that's why I'm going to ask you this question. So what entrepreneurship means to you. But I think even for not to preach to the choir or anything, or to detract too much from this conversation, but I think I get asked a lot, and so do my colleagues in our office. So what stands out to you in a prospective Northwestern student, given that many of these students, again, are prospective Northwestern students or applicants, what have you, it really is that passion that you see among the panel of guests that we have here today, the friends that we've made throughout these different experiences. That passion for whatever it may be is what matters to us as a Northwestern community. So I challenge y'all to really take a deep dive into that rather than trying to vie after what you think is, maybe so great to have on your resume or so great to have this. Those passions will be great to have on your resume, in my opinion. But what does entrepreneurship mean to you, Connor, and my wonderful guest here today?
Yeah, it's funny how the simple, direct questions are actually the hardest ones. Define something, is super straightforward. I would say that entrepreneurship is creating something in a context where there is a high amount of either unknown or risk or variability. I think sometimes we especially in our very kind of tech-centric world, we think of it very much as creating some new technology. And I actually don't necessarily think that kind of honed in a definition is quite right. I think it is creating something maybe from scratch, maybe similar to something that's already been done, but that you are adding some level of either innovation or your unique spin on something. And the context is you're not in some support system or infrastructure where it's easy to just roll out. There's a high degree of uncertainty and a high potential for failure. And in some ways, I think that potential for failure is what makes it a really supercharged learning experience. The fact that you're trying to create something from scratch and that, maybe you're wearing a lot of hats and a lot of things are falling on your shoulders, that's where the learning comes from. So anyways, I've gotten past my definition of entrepreneurship now and kind of taken it towards why is it a great thing to explore as a student? But I think for me, that's exactly why I got so much out of it.
No, that was important to share, so I appreciate that. Melissa, you're up next.
Yes. So learning how to be an entrepreneur, I believe, is a superpower. It's a skill set that I think is critical for anyone right now that wants to be a leader in our future world. As things get more complicated, just learning how to step up, see challenges, and build solutions for it. So many people have ideas in this world for nonprofit initiatives and companies and widgets and all of these things. Very, very few people know how to execute. So being an entrepreneur is not an identity. It's not who you are. It's an activity. So being the type of person that can have these ideas, see these problems, and then build a solution for it, again, is a superpower. You may choose to apply that to startups and starting your own company. But there will be lots of times in your career where it's a critical leadership skill, where it's something that you can apply inside of a company, that maybe you have an idea for a side hustle or a project that you work on the side. And that's why entrepreneurial thinking and doing is so very important. And I hope it's something that all of you learn how to do, because it's not even about, it's a little bit about learning how to fail, but it's also realizing that failure is not trying.
And just to add to that, I completely agree. One of the ways I think about entrepreneurship is, especially in the context of college, is forging your own path. So what maybe you're discovering now as you're applying to school and trying to pick a school and major, if not now, you definitely will later, as far as there are a lot of different paths that people expect you to take, or that you feel pressure to take because that's what everyone else is doing. But only one path is yours. And so starting something, finding a problem that you're passionate about solving and trying to build that, with the team is a real differentiator that I think gives you a lot more kind of internal pride than necessarily following what you think other people want you to do. And I think that's probably the biggest mistake that I see students and recent grads coming out of school is regretting that they didn't choose to try to do the thing that they really wanted to do because they felt so much pressure. So I would just encourage you, again, college is a great time where there are very low stakes to try something completely different. You've got nothing to lose. You probably, hopefully aren't trying to make rent on your business. So you can just have like the freedom to try something and fail and learn and grow for the next time, I would add.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's something, at least, I think I'm still learning to be comfortable with that in my everyday life. I feel like I'm just going to take a step back and say, all of this is really good life advice. I will be reflecting upon all of this after this episode here today and after work, to be quite honest. And I also think that I think many of these students, including, and this has been shared by some of y'all already and in the podcast, how, at least in my experience, which echoes some of what you've said already, I came from a high school, touching base and connecting with the audience members here today, where I was very successful, quote unquote, on paper. Academically, I was great. I went to a very well-resourced, very great high school where we were all really successful and we never failed at doing anything. But then I got to Northwestern and the scripts kind of flipped on me, where it felt like, oh, this is the first time I'm challenged to actually study and actually do X, Y, and Z in the classroom, or challenge myself to fail, as some of y'all have already said, and try new things without necessarily fearing any repercussions or anything along those lines, because there's so much support already in place. So I do appreciate everything that has been shared. So speaking of new ventures, I'm actually going to take a maybe 5-second break from picking on Connor and pick on you, Mike, and Melissa again. So you've started this podcast. This is your more recent passion project. And when I was chatting with your colleague, Elizabeth, starting a podcast is not easy at all. And it sounds like it's not something that y'all have ever done before. I could be wrong. So what inspired this podcast? I know that a lot of this is surrounding the storytelling on entrepreneurship and the stories of many other incredible Northwestern alumni, including Connor. Can you talk a little bit more about that process and what inspired this? Melissa, go for it.
Yeah, so we really have to practice what we preach at the garage. And so being innovative during the pandemic was important to us. And so we thought like, why not make a podcast? And it turns out it's really hard to make a good podcast. There's like all of this like editing and like asking the right questions and like finding the right platform to put it on. So we're really excited to release this out to the world. I hope that everyone watching today can check out some of the episodes and maybe like tell the communities and friends that you're part of. But we really made it for you. And we wanted to show, it's easy for me to say like, you should work on an entrepreneurial project while you're in college because it will lead to a great career path. But it's quite another to see it. And in this first season, we have 6 episodes, 6 different alums who took very different paths, Northwestern, different majors, different areas of study. But the common thing that unites them all, which is what unites all students at the garage, is that they worked on a project, kind of an entrepreneurial endeavor while they were in school. And that kind of helped shape where their careers are today. So we wanted to not only tell students some perspectives about this path and why entrepreneurship is so important, but to really show it through this podcast. And that's what we've done. And Mike, who is our host, did an awesome job. Is there anything you want to add about the making of our podcast?
Yeah, no, it's been a very fun endeavor to undertake and have excuses to have great conversations with Connor and a bunch of our other guests. But yeah, I think we really do practice what we preach, and I think the biggest strength for us is storytelling from the successful students out of the garage rather than us telling them. Is just can you share with everyone else what you learned? And I think that's much more insightful and practical than us just trying to relay the message. So it's been a fun 6 episodes. So Connor obviously started at Google and is now at YouTube after school. We have someone who works at Apple, Instagram, Goldman Sachs, and then 2 founders. So Lucas Phillips, who founded BrewBike at Northwestern as a freshman and has since he graduated a couple years ago, has raised a couple $1 million in venture capital, expanded to 4 different campuses, and is still running BrewBike. And then Sarah Ahmad, who was also had a resident team at the Garage. She actually had to make one of these kind of difficult decisions when in between her junior and senior year, she had an offer for a really prestigious summer internship, but decided not to take it in order to participate in the Garage's summer accelerator program. And since then, that company didn't work out. She moved to Silicon Valley. She ended up quitting her job after about a year to start another company with another Northwestern classmate called Stable. And they have now been through the Y Combinator program in San Francisco, which is a really prestigious program, and again, raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for this startup. So I think, all of their experiences have different takeaways and different nuggets of advice or perspectives that definitely aren't for everyone, but hopefully throughout these episodes, you take away a couple of things that you can be intentional about as a student at Northwestern, choosing what to prioritize your time and resources on. So we're excited to actually have an audience listen to it and give us some feedback.
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I'm already subscribed. I'm already following it, to be quite honest. And I did not just do this because this is, leading up to this episode, but I thought it was really awesome. I don't really listen to podcasts that often. I feel like I just shamed myself for that. But I love this podcast. And I just dropped the link for anyone curious. If you use Spotify, the podcast trailers are up there right now, and you can get a little bit of a sneak peek on what the first season episodes will look like. And then Melissa, just as a quick aside, so one of our viewers here today said, use the AIR app, spelled AIRR, for quotes from podcasts. I'm not sure what they're referring to, but feel free to, Mike and Melissa, to use that for producing.
We'll check it out. Thanks for the recommendation.
Absolutely. So now that we're sort of not necessarily nearing the end, but I want to turn it back a little bit more about talking about the Garage while we also continue talking about y'all's podcast. Thank you for sharing all that information. So question for the audience, Connor, how did you initially get involved with the Garage? And Melissa or Mike, how do most students participate in the Garage initially? Is there some sort of common experience for all newcomers, or do you just jump straight into working on projects?
Yes, I can go first because I think mine was a bit unique in that the Garage was formed during the launched in the last year of my time as an undergrad at Northwestern. And actually, as I say, as an undergrad at Northwestern, I always forget to mention that I have also joined the Medill School to do a master's at Northwestern. I always forget, I'm still a Northwestern student. I don't know, that just hit me. So a little plug for the MSIMC program at Medill. Anyways, I joined in the last year of my undergrad at Northwestern. And for me, how I kind of was involved, interestingly evolved from a student group that I was involved in. So there's this organization, it's now called Student Holdings. It used to be called Northwestern Student Holdings. Long, boring story, but basically we created, launched, and managed student-focused businesses on campus. I was, for a period, the CEO of this cookie business, of all things, kind of similar to Lucas's coffee business. But anyways, I was involved in this interesting organization where students are kind of fully responsible for the ideation and the launch and day-to-day management of businesses of a wide range. And as part of that, we had advisors in, at the time, the Farley Center for Entrepreneurship, who, were kind of there's clearly something here to this idea of a support system around students that is to some degree hands-off and lets the students kind of chart their own path and fail and you know, play with real products and concepts and you know, test them in a not super theoretical way, a super like, if someone's trying to buy a cookie at 1 a.m. at, you know, main library and you're not there to sell it, like you're going to have a complaint kind of real customer problems kind of way. There was something there. And so I think that in a lot of ways actually precipitated the garage of like, we as a university need to invest more in this really great applied hands-on learning. And so Northwestern Student Holdings ended up being kind of a member of the garage. And then my other kind of touch point was, as I alluded to before, working on a robotics startup that, you know, called the garage home, almost like a little incubator. And so, yeah, those were my 2 touch points. And I'm sure Melissa and Mike have examples of many other paths that bring students to the garage.
Yeah, happy to jump in and talk about a few. And then Melissa, if there's anything you want to add on. There are a bunch of different ways to get involved with the garage. We try to make it as accessible to every student as possible. In normal times when it's open, any student is welcome to come in and hang out and grab some free coffee and snacks and just kind of explore on their own. Kind of our entry level program for students is called the Tinkerer program. And so this is kind of a learn at your own pace program where you get 10 weekly emails about the fundamentals of starting a startup. So you have kind of this education information piece. You're also added into the garage's community Slack channel. So this is a place where we have hundreds of current students who are working on different entrepreneurial projects. Anytime you have a question about, you know, what services to use, you want input or feedback, you want to see if there's a market for your problem, you can drop some questions into the garage Slack and the community kind of jumps in and helps each other out. So the community is kind of one of our most powerful resources at the garage. You can also take a class, like Connor said, at the Farley Center. So many of those classes actually take place at the garage in normal times. So you get some exposure to, you know, some of the resident teams hanging out there. There's also a student organization called EPIC. And this is a student-run organization for those interested in entrepreneurship. They have a program called Launch where students basically get together and try to launch their own startup within a matter of a few weeks. So there are all these different, basically we're not hard to get a hold of. And what we find often is that the more someone becomes involved or invests their time and energy into the garage, the more they get out of it. So we have, you know, a bunch of different programs after you've been a tinkerer. You know, our kind of core program is called Residency. So this is for up to 35 teams per year that are a little more serious, have a little more traction. They get a dedicated mentor. They have regular accountability huddles with each other where they kind of hold each other accountable for their goals and progress. And then we have some kind of more cohorted programs. Propel is specifically for female entrepreneurs. They, again, 8 of them are chosen a quarter. They get up to $1,000 in grant funding, as well as dedicated mentors. We have a version of that called Activate, which is for Black Northwestern students, and also a summer accelerator program where 10 teams are chosen. They get up to $10,000 upfront to work on their startups full time and kind of have dedicated programming, and that culminates in a demo day at the end of the summer. So there are a ton of different ways to get involved and actually get like real cash to move your startup forward. And I think, you know, the staff and peers are always available to kind of advise on best path forward.
Yeah, I think that's a really great overview as to all the programs that y'all have available. I'll also be linking out for my viewers out here today, the Garage's website, and I'm also going to be sharing this wonderful graphic that was sent over by your team that shows you a little bit of the different structures in place to help support you in the Garage, no matter the level of experience or, you know, entry experience that you have. Actually, I'm going to ask y'all now because now I kind of prompted that question in itself. Do you have to have any experience with entrepreneurship to get involved with spaces like the Garage? Go for it.
Absolutely not. Literally all students are welcome at the Garage. We have undergraduate students, grad students, and PhD students all sitting side by side from every different school here at Northwestern. We've had students that are studying music, journalism at Medill, engineering, economics, education and social policy, you name it. The more diverse the students and their backgrounds and areas study, the better. You don't need to know anything. You don't even have to be able to spell the word entrepreneurship to show up. We just want you to show up and get involved and hang out.
Love it. I love how kind y'all are. And I'm not just saying that, like every time I work with y'all, I'm just like, wow, I wish I was back in undergrad, or maybe have another reason to go back to grad school and then work with y'all over at the garage. Well, all those great things. We'll talk afterwards about all those wonderful experiences. There was something else that I had been meaning to ask, but I appreciate you sharing that. With that in mind, I think that something else I want to also bring up into this conversation was the idea of not taking yourself too seriously. You brought that up, Connor, and Mike, you sort of also mentioned this in the podcast episode that you were so wonderfully put together and shared with me again. And I think that sort of ties to everything that we already been talking about here today. I think that many, at least in my experience, many folks that I've interacted with are like, at least in my experience, including myself, I catch myself in this trap of like, oh, I have to do this, I have to do that in this specific way, because these are what I expect. This is what I think people expect out of me in order to attain this opportunity, in order to attain this idea of success. So can you talk a little bit more about that shared lesson value of not taking yourself too seriously when it comes to this work? I know it's a very open-ended question, but it's something that stood out to me at least.
Yeah, definitely. For those listening, I will strongly encourage you to listen to the podcast, because I think we will lose a little bit of kind of the middle part of the story that helps us get to this, like, don't take yourself too seriously bit. But I think you'll be able to kind of connect the dots. And if you listen to the podcast, you'll connect them even better. But for me, I think I was really committed to this idea of success, I guess, at a high level of like, I want to like have the best job, and I go to a great school, and like all of these things. And I don't necessarily think that there's anything wrong. There's certainly nothing wrong with that kind of aspiration. We should all push ourselves to do our best. But I think there have been times when I look back on my time in college where I like think about myself and I'm like, wow, you were really serious. Like all of these kind of trade-offs that I alluded to before, like taking 11 internships means I think I went to like 3 Northwestern football games in 4 years. And not that, Northwestern is still not the powerhouse in football that I once thought, maybe it will be, but that's still a really fun experience. And we do win. We're not a powerhouse, but that aside, like that is a really fun, and for some people formative, element of their college experience that I kind of just wrote off, because I was like, I don't have time to go and sit, not producing something for that many hours, which is like obviously like ridiculous, especially now that I like actually verbalize that. But that was kind of the decision making of like, well, I could be doing XYZ other thing during that time. And so I made that decision. And at the end of the day, like I achieved a lot as an undergrad, and since then I'm so thankful for my Northwestern experience. And so it's not about, I wish I had done something differently per se, but I think the mentality of being so committed to the path once I had figured out what does my journey look like, and then I was like, laser focused, that can be both a really great asset and it can also be a weakness in some ways. And so not being able, almost having kind of blinders on to the other things going around me at Northwestern, that could be a weakness. And so I guess to anyone, even if your path looks like completely different than mine, try to like tell yourself, okay, in 5 years, if I look back on this, what are the things I might say I regret not doing? And if I might think I should be doing them now, give them a chance and try to give yourself a little bit of wiggle room in your path, because that wiggle, you might actually do something and realize, oh, wow, like this thing I thought was like a side thing, I should be spending more time on that. And that can kind of come at the expense if you're too laser focused on any one thing.
Just to add on to that quickly, I agree with you, Connor. And I think, given the caliber of students you are, if you're applying to Northwestern, you maybe have not experienced that much, quote unquote, like failure or visible failure that other people have seen in your lives so far. And I think some students come to school afraid to try something new, or afraid to start their own company, or afraid to start a project, because what if I fail? What will people think? And I think the community at the Garage is very embracing of just giving things a try and knowing that it doesn't have to succeed for you to take away knowledge skills, relationships that will help you in the future. And so I mentioned Ali earlier, who started Party in a Box. When that company, when they shut it down because it didn't work, they had a failure party and they embraced it. They got pizzas, they had fun, right? And so I think that attitude and ethos and community is super important, just to give people the confidence to try. Because even the startup or if the project doesn't work, you're definitely taking away skills, knowledge, relationship, ideas that you wouldn't otherwise have.
Yeah, the last thing that I'll add is now, the Garage has been around for 5 years, which means we have a number of alums like Connor and Ali that are out there in the world now. And so now there's this whole group of people out there in the world that have been part of the Garage or know what it is or have an appreciation for it and know the types of students that come here. And again, regardless of success or failure of your project, that have a lot of respect for you for even trying. And I think that's one of the great things about the Garage is like now that community of people will be, hiring and pulling people into startup teams. And so even beyond Northwestern, there's this huge community of people that will understand you and your journey and be there to support you.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a great way to end this, but I do also want to open it up to see if there's anything else that any of you want to share. Again, in advance, thank you so much for being here. I always feel like a better human being whenever I get to talk to wonderful entrepreneurs like yourself. But is there anything else that y'all want to plug or share before we do wrap up with our wonderful audience here today? Looks like shake of the heads.
Go Wildcats.
Go Cats.
Yeah, go Cats.
And Connor, we have been winning more recently, but yeah, I agree with that sentiment. No disrespect to our Wildcats. We've won a lot this season.
Someone is for sure going to send me something about that comment.
It's okay to fail. Even our Northwestern Wildcat football team, it's okay to fail. That's what's important. That's my takeaway here today. But again, thank you so much to everyone, Mike, Melissa, and Connor for being here today. And for my viewers here, also, thank you so much for taking the time to spend your Monday or maybe Tuesday with us. I've dropped a lot of links in our chat here with opportunities for you to engage with the Garage, following them on Instagram, of course, subscribing to their podcast, filling out their form so you can be notified about upcoming podcast episodes and updates, as well as getting to know a little bit more about backstory of how they went about this process and engaging with the Garage. And of course, having the opportunity to be notified when the episode featuring our star Connor goes live on wherever you listen to your podcast, whether it be Spotify, on Apple, what have you. All those links are there. And for us, selfishly, please subscribe to our YouTube channel if you would like to engage with this content even further. Hit that bell notification. You can also feel free to give this a like if you enjoyed this content. Please follow us on Instagram and the Garage on Instagram. Both of our Instagrams are linked in our description here below. You might have to refresh your page just as an FYI. But thank you again. Have a wonderful day. Stay safe. Wear a mask. We're going to almost finish this pandemic, hopefully soon. And please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Go Cats. Thanks, everyone.